Innocent biker badly beaten by bent cops. Then 150 Hells Angels ride in. When a lone biker stops to help at the scene of a highway accident, corrupt officers mistake his leather vest for gang colors and decide to teach him a lesson. But what those lawmen didn't know would shake their entire department to its core. The late autumn sun filtered through bare branches along Highway 17, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. Miles Harrington rode his 20-year-old Harley with practiced ease, the engine's familiar rumble a comfort after another 12-hour shift at the lumber mill. His leather vest, a memorial to his late father who'd ridden the same bike decades ago, flapped gently in the cold wind. The accident came into view around a blind curve. A sedan had spun into the drainage ditch, its front end crumpled against a concrete culvert. Miles pulled onto the shoulder without thinking, his emergency training from his volunteer firefighter days kicking in automatically. He killed the engine and dismounted, already pulling his phone from his pocket. Smoke rose from the sedan's hood, and Miles could see a figure slumped over the steering wheel. He was halfway down the embankment when the patrol car arrived, lights flashing but no siren. 2 officers emerged, their movements deliberate and unhurried in a way that made something in Miles's gut tighten with unease. "Step away from the vehicle," the taller officer called out. His name tag read Briggs, and his eyes were cold, assessing. His partner, Officer Dunne, circled around to Miles's right, hand resting on his belt. "There's someone hurt down here," Miles said, gesturing toward the smoking car. "I called 911, but we need to check if they're—" "I said step away," Briggs repeated, his voice hardening, his gaze fixed on Miles's vest, on the patches that commemorated his father's old riding club. "Now." Miles raised his hands slowly, backing away from the sedan. "I'm just trying to help. I'm a volunteer firefighter in Ashland County. My certification card is in my wallet if you—" Briggs closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. "You're wearing colors on my highway. That makes you my problem." He grabbed Miles's shoulder and spun him around with unnecessary force, slamming him face first against the dirt embankment. The impact drove the air from Miles's lungs. Gravel bit into his cheek as Briggs wrenched his arms behind his back. "Wait, this is my father's vest. I'm not in any club. I work at Patterson's Lumber. I live on Maple Street. You can check." "Shut up," Dunne said, joining his partner. His boot connected with Miles's ribs, a sharp kick that sent pain lancing through his side. "We know your type, riding through here like you own the place." Miles tried to speak, to explain, but Briggs's knee pressed into his spine, grinding him into the dirt. Above them, forgotten, smoke continued to rise from the wrecked sedan. The injured driver inside remained unconscious, unattended. "Please," Miles gasped. "Someone needs help. Just let me—" The second kick caught him in the kidney. Miles's vision blurred with pain. He could hear Briggs talking into his radio. Words like suspected gang activity and resisting arrest. None of it true. All of it damning. Dunne's hands rifled through Miles's pockets, pulling out his wallet, his phone, his keys. "Clean record," Dunne said, sounding almost disappointed as he examined Miles's license. "Miles Harrington, 38, Ashland address, but that doesn't mean anything. Could be a clean skin." Briggs yanked Miles to his feet, only to drive his fist into Miles's stomach. Miles doubled over, retching, held upright only by the officer's grip on his collar. "Here's how this works," Briggs said quietly, his breath hot against Miles's ear. "You're going to get back on that piece of trash motorcycle and ride out of our county. And you're never coming back. Because if we see you again, if we see anyone wearing those colors again, it's going to go a lot worse than this." Another punch, this time to Miles's face. His lip split, blood filling his mouth. Dunne joined in, his fists methodical, professional, landing blows that wouldn't show easily through clothing. They worked him over with the efficiency of men who'd done this before, who knew exactly how far they could go. When they finally released him, Miles collapsed onto the gravel. His vest was torn, his father's patches dirt-stained and crumpled. Through swollen eyes, he watched Briggs and Dunne walk back to their patrol car, abandoning the accident scene entirely, leaving him broken on the roadside. He lay there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Eventually, sirens approached, real emergency services, an ambulance, and a different patrol car. Miles tried to tell the paramedics what had happened, but his jaw ached too much to speak clearly. They loaded him into the ambulance alongside the woman from the sedan, who was mercifully alive, and took them both to County General. The emergency room doctor cataloged his injuries with clinical precision. 3 cracked ribs, severe bruising to his torso and face, a concussion, split lip, and potential kidney damage. When Miles tried to file a report with the hospital security guard, the man looked uncomfortable and suggested Miles might be mistaken about what happened. No one wanted to hear about 2 officers nearly beating an innocent man to death on the side of the highway. They kept Miles overnight for observation. In the morning, despite the doctor's protests, he checked himself out. His ribs screamed with every breath as he took a taxi back to where he'd left his motorcycle. Someone had vandalized it. Slashed tires, broken mirrors, key scratches along the tank. Miles stood there in the cold morning light, staring at his father's ruined bike, and felt something break inside him that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. He called his brother to pick him up. Lawrence arrived an hour later, his face going pale when he saw Miles's condition. "Who did this?" Lawrence demanded, helping Miles into the truck with careful hands. "Miles, you need to press charges. You need to... against 2 cops?" Miles laughed bitterly, then winced at the pain it caused. "You saw what the hospital said. Nobody wants to get involved. It's my word against theirs. And they'll say I was resisting or threatening them or whatever they want." Lawrence drove in silence for a while, his jaw tight with barely contained rage. Finally he said, "Do you remember Dad's friend, Hank?" Miles turned carefully to look at his brother. "Hank Peterson?" "Yeah, they rode together back in the 70s. Why?" "Because Dad's vest wasn't from just any riding club," Lawrence said slowly. "And Hank might want to know that someone beat you half to death for wearing it." 3 days passed. Miles stayed with Lawrence and his family, unable to face his own empty house, unable to sleep without seeing Briggs's cold eyes and feeling those methodical fists. His body was a map of pain, purple and yellow bruises blooming across his ribs, his face swollen and distorted. Lawrence's wife, Sarah, brought him ice packs and pain medication, her eyes brimming with sympathy she didn't voice. On the 4th morning, Miles woke to the distant sound of thunder, except the sky outside was clear, and the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, a deep rhythmic rumble that seemed to shake the windows in their frames. He limped to the front window and pulled back the curtain. The street was filled with motorcycles. Not just a few, dozens upon dozens of them, stretching down the block in both directions. Harley-Davidsons mostly, their chrome gleaming in the morning sun, their engines idling in near-perfect synchronization. And every single rider wore the same patches on their vests, the same colors that Miles's father had worn decades ago. Lawrence appeared beside him, equally stunned. "I called Hank," he said quietly. "Told him what happened. I didn't expect." The lead rider dismounted, a man in his 60s with iron-gray hair and a weathered face that had seen its share of hard miles. He walked up to Lawrence's front door with the careful confidence of someone who'd never needed to prove anything, flanked by 2 younger riders who moved like shadows. When Lawrence opened the door, the older man's eyes went immediately to Miles, taking in every visible injury with a single sweeping glance. "Miles Harrington," the man said, and his voice carried the weight of old friendship and older debts. "I'm Hank Peterson. Your daddy saved my life in '76, pulled me out of a burning wreck on Route 40. I told him then that if he or his ever needed anything, all they had to do was call." His gaze hardened. "Your brother told me what Briggs and Dunne did to you. Told me they beat you for wearing your daddy's vest, for trying to help someone. That true?" Miles nodded, not trusting his voice. Hank's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. "Those patches you were wearing, your daddy earned them riding with us 40 years ago. He left the club when he started a family, and we respected that. But those colors still mean something. They mean brotherhood. They mean nobody touches one of ours without answering for it. He turned slightly, gesturing to the sea of motorcycles behind him. I made some calls. These riders came from 6 states. Some drove through the night to be here. We're about 150 strong, and we're going to have a conversation with Officers Briggs and Dunne. We're going to explain to them what those patches mean, and we're going to make sure they understand that you're under our protection now. Miles's throat tightened. I don't want any trouble. I don't want anyone getting hurt or arrested because of me. Hank smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. Son, we're not going to break any laws. We're just going to visit the sheriff's department and have a peaceful conversation. 150 law-abiding citizens expressing our concern about police brutality. Nothing illegal about that. He paused. But those 2 officers need to understand that the man they beat is family, and family protects family. Within an hour, they were rolling. Miles rode in Lawrence's truck, unable to manage a motorcycle with his injuries, but the rest of the convoy moved like a steel river through town. People stopped on sidewalks to watch, stunned by the sheer number of motorcycles passing through sleepy Ashland. Store owners came to their windows. Traffic halted at intersections, drivers too awed to move. The sheriff's department sat on the edge of downtown, a squat brick building with a small parking lot and a flagpole out front. The motorcycles pulled in and filled every available space, then lined the street for 3 blocks in either direction. The rumble of their engines was like rolling thunder, a sound that vibrated in the chest and demanded attention. Sheriff Tom Buckley emerged from the building, his face pale, flanked by 2 deputies who looked equally shaken. Hank approached alone, his hands visible and empty, but the mass of riders behind him made any threat unnecessary. They didn't dismount, didn't rev their engines or make aggressive gestures. They simply sat, a silent wall of leather and chrome, and waited. Sheriff Buckley, Hank said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. My name is Hank Peterson. We're here about 2 of your officers, Briggs and Dunne. 4 days ago, they beat an innocent man half to death on Highway 17. Man named Miles Harrington, volunteer firefighter, no criminal record, was stopping to help at an accident scene. They beat him because they didn't like his vest, because they thought he was in a gang. They were wrong. Buckley's eyes widened. Mr. Peterson, I don't know what you've been told, but I've been told the truth. Hank interrupted, his voice hardening. And here's what's going to happen. You're going to investigate those officers. Really investigate them, not just file the complaint away. You're going to look at their records, their history, see if this is a pattern. And you're going to make sure Miles Harrington gets justice. Or what? Buckley said, trying to sound authoritative but failing. His gaze swept the army of bikers surrounding his building. You can't intimidate law enforcement. I could arrest you for what? Peacefully assembling? Exercising our right to petition for redress of grievances? Hank smiled without humor. Sheriff, every person here has a clean record. We're not threatening anyone. We're just very concerned, citizens who want to make sure the law applies equally to everyone, including corrupt cops. One of the deputies whispered something to Buckley. The sheriff's face went from pale to gray. He nodded slowly. I'll look into it, he said finally. But you all need to disperse. You're blocking traffic. We'll leave when we're satisfied, Hank said. Bring out Briggs and Dunne. Let them see what they started. Let them understand who they hurt. Buckley hesitated, then turned and spoke quietly into his radio. 5 minutes later, Officers Briggs and Dunne emerged from the building, their swagger evaporating the instant they saw the sea of motorcycles. Briggs's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, but Buckley grabbed his wrist, stopping him. These are the 2, Hank announced, his voice carrying to every rider. These are the men who beat Miles Harrington while he was trying to save someone's life. These are the cowards who hide behind badges and use their authority to hurt innocent people. Briggs tried to bluster. We were responding to suspicious activity. The suspect was the victim, Hank corrected coldly, was wearing his deceased father's vest and trying to perform first aid. You beat him because you're bullies who've never been held accountable. That ends today. The silence that followed was profound. 150 riders, absolutely still, absolutely silent, their combined presence more intimidating than any threat. Briggs and Dunne stood frozen, finally understanding that their actions had consequences they'd never imagined. Sheriff Buckley cleared his throat. "Mr. Peterson, I give you my word. This will be investigated thoroughly. If your allegations are substantiated, appropriate action will be taken." "Not good enough," Hank said flatly. "We want an independent investigation. State police, maybe the FBI. Because I'm betting Briggs and Dunne aren't the only problems in your department. I'm betting there's a culture here that lets this kind of thing happen." Buckley's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I'll request an outside investigation. You have my word." "And Miles Harrington gets full restitution," Hank continued. "Medical bills, repairs to his motorcycle, pain and suffering. Either the department pays, or Briggs and Dunne pay out of their own pockets. But that man gets made whole." "Agreed," Buckley said quietly, his authority crumbling under the weight of Hank's implacable stare. Hank studied him for a long moment, then nodded. He raised one hand, and as one, the motorcycles roared to life. The sound was deafening, triumphant, a declaration that justice would be served. Then, with military precision, they began to roll out, filing past the sheriff's department in a river of chrome and defiance. But they didn't go far. The convoy moved to Lawrence's house, where Miles waited. When Hank knocked on the door, Miles answered, leaning heavily on a cane, his face still a patchwork of bruises but his eyes clear. "It's done," Hank said simply. "State police are coming to investigate. Briggs and Dunne are suspended pending the outcome, and you're going to get every penny you're owed." He paused, then reached into his vest and pulled out a patch, the same colors Miles's father had worn, the same symbol that had nearly gotten Miles killed. "Your daddy left the club, but he never really stopped being one of us. And neither are you. If you want these back, if you want to ride with us, you've got a place. Always will." Miles took the patch with shaking hands, his vision blurring with tears that had nothing to do with pain. "Thank you," he managed. "I don't know how to, I can't, Nothing to thank us for," Hank said gruffly. "Family protects family. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked." He glanced back at the assembled riders, now spread across the neighborhood, their presence transforming the quiet street into something alive and powerful. "Your daddy would have done the same for any of us. We're just paying forward what he gave us: loyalty, brotherhood, and the knowledge that we're never alone." Over the following weeks, the story broke wide open. The state police investigation uncovered a pattern of abuse spanning years. Briggs and Dunne had targeted dozens of bikers, minorities, and anyone they deemed suspicious. Other victims came forward, emboldened by Miles's stand and the undeniable support of the riding community. Both officers were fired and faced criminal charges. Sheriff Buckley, tainted by association, resigned. Miles's medical bills were paid in full, not by the department, but by Hank's club, who started a fund that raised 3 times what was needed. The excess went to repairing his father's motorcycle, which emerged from the shop better than it had been in decades. But more than the money, more than the justice, Miles found something he hadn't realized he'd been missing: community. The riders who'd come from 6 states became regular visitors. They helped Miles through his recovery, took him to physical therapy appointments, sat with him on difficult days when the trauma of the beating came back in nightmares. Lawrence's kids gained a dozen uncles overnight, tough-looking men who taught them about honor and loyalty and standing up for what's right. When Miles finally healed enough to ride again, 150 motorcycles escorted him on his first journey down Highway 17. They rode past the spot where he'd been beaten, past the sheriff's department, through the county that had failed him. But this time, Miles wasn't alone. He was surrounded by brothers, by family, by people who'd proven that the truest measure of character isn't how you look or what you wear, but how you treat others when no one's watching. The patches on his vest, his father's patches, now his own again, caught the sunlight as they rode. Miles thought about the night his father had told him stories about Hank and the old days. about roads traveled and bonds forged. He'd thought those were just stories, relics of a bygone era, but now he understood. Brotherhood wasn't about leather or motorcycles or patches. It was about showing up when it mattered, about standing beside someone when the world turned against them, about proving that one person's pain is everyone's responsibility. They rode until sunset, the highway stretching endlessly ahead, full of possibility and promise. And for the first time since the beating, Miles felt whole again. Not because his body had healed, but because he'd learned what his father had known all along, that the measure of a life isn't found in solitude or self-sufficiency, but in the connections we forge and the family we choose. In the fading light, with the rumble of engines surrounding him like a heartbeat, Miles Harrington finally understood what the patches on his vest truly meant. They meant he was never riding alone. They meant that somewhere, always, there were brothers watching his back. And they meant that the legacy his father had left him wasn't just a motorcycle or a piece of leather, but something far more precious, the knowledge that in a world that could be cruel and unjust, there were still people willing to fight for what was right. If you have enjoyed the story, tell YouTube to send you more stories like this by subscribing to this channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment.